Hey Adventures, so today is September 22nd, which is Hobbit Day. And so I want to, as I generally try and do, have a video for Hobbit Day, specifically something regarding hobbits. And today I want to talk about Gollum and the importance of Gollum to the story and to the destruction of the One Ring. That's a very important aspect of this story and one that is overlooked so often in discussions regarding the Lord of the Rings. So in order to start on this conversation though, we first have to kind of know a little bit more about who Gollum was, or rather who Smeagol was. And that is a Stoor, or as we'll see when we read it into it a little bit more, that's not exactly correct, but basically the Stoors are like a subset of the hobbits. They're often found living by rivers and being less averse to swimming and boats and that sort of thing. But basically he was a hobbit. I will be doing quite a bit of reading from the source material here as we go through this, because I feel that that's the best way to understand. I will take those passages that I'm reading and then expound upon them a little bit, but I feel that that's the best way to truly understand and explain the thought process that I have when I'm going through this, and to clearly get the actual details, which is why so often when I do videos like this, I read from the source material. I take the material itself to explain what I'm talking about. So I'm going to read in the Shadows of the Past when Gandalf and Frodo are talking about Gollum. I will be taking several pieces from this part of the book in order to explain some of my thoughts a little bit. So I'm just going to read this, probably the whole paragraph here, at least until it gets to a point where I don't need to read any more of it. Long after, but still very long ago, there lived by the banks of the great river, on the edge of Wilderland, a clever-handed and quiet-footed little people. I guess they were of hobbit kind, akin to the fathers of the Stoors. For they loved the river and often swam in it, or made little boats of reeds. I'm going to pause here for a moment. So first off, we can see akin to the fathers of the Stoors. So they were not Stoors, they were akin to the fathers of the Stoors. That means that they were not Stoors at all. They were just akin to them. It also says, I guess they were of hobbit kind. So they were apparently hobbits of some sort that were closer to the Stoors than they were to the Fallowhides or to the Harfoots. But still, they were not Stoors. They were a kind of something similar to a hobbit, something similar to the Stoors. All right, so that's the first important detail. Then we continue on. There was among them a family of high repute, for it was large and wealthier than most, and it was ruled by a grandmother of the folk, stern and wise in old lore, such as they had. The most inquisitive and curious-minded of that family was called Smeagol. He was interested in roots and beginnings. He dived into deep pools, he burrowed under trees and growing plants, he tunneled into green mounds, and he ceased to look up at the hilltops, or the leaves on trees, or the flowers opening in the air. His head and his eyes were downward. So that's a description of the character, of the personality of this Smeagol, who we obviously know later becomes the character Gollum. Of course, we know that he finds the ring, or that his friend Deagle finds the ring, and Smeagol kills him for it and takes the ring, claiming it as his own and as a birthday present for himself. That then corrupts him. People start hating him for it, and then he gets rejected by the society and slinks off into the mountains. But then, continuing on later in this chapter, Gandalf is again talking, and we see that Gandalf says, even Gollum was not wholly ruined. He had proved tougher than even one of the wise would have guessed, as a hobbit might. There was a little corner of his mind that was still his own, and light came through it, as through a chink in the dark, light out of the past. It was actually pleasant, I think, to hear a kindly voice again, bringing up memories of wind and trees and sun on the grass and such forgotten things. So basically I want to point out here that Gollum was not wholly ruined by the ring. The ring never fully corrupted him completely, which is why he never became a wraith, even though he held the ring for something like 650 years, or if I remember correctly. He, as the hobbits were, and you see this theme come through with Bilbo and with Frodo, that they're hardy, they're enduring, they're not going to be corrupted by the ring nearly as easily as somebody, as a human would, as a full human would, even though the hobbits are evidently of humankind as well. Let's continue reading a little bit on more in this chapter. "What do you mean?" said Frodo. "Surely the ring was his precious and the only thing he cared for. But if he hated it, why didn't he get rid of it, or go away and leave it?" "You ought to begin to understand, Frodo, after all you have heard," said Gandalf. "He hated it and loved it, as he hated and loved himself. He could not get rid of it. He had no will left in the matter. A ring of power looks after itself, Frodo. It may slip off treacherously, but its keeper never abandons it. At most, he plays with the idea of handing it on to someone else's care, and that only at an early stage, when it first begins to grip. But as far as I know, Bilbo alone in history has ever gone beyond playing and really done it. He needed all my help too, and even so, he would never have just forsaken it or cast it aside. It was not Gollum, Frodo, but the ring itself that decided things. The ring left him." Basically, what I want to point out there is that while yes, the ring was precious to him and very important to him, he also hated it. He hated the feeling of slave. He hated being enslaved to this ring, to his desires for the ring, even though at the same time he loved it. It was his precious. And so this is all just background information that I'm using to build up to the eventual final point about why Gollum was so important to this story. So now basically going to read a big chunk, several paragraphs here, but this is an important part about pity, and I'm sure you know, if you're well read with Lord of the Rings, you know, or have watched it several times, you know what I'm talking about here before I even start reading it, but let's continue. "But this is terrible," cried Frodo, "far worse than the worst that I imagined from your hints and warnings. Oh, Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid. What am I to do? What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature when he had the chance." "Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil, and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity." "I am sorry," said Frodo, "but I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum." "You have not seen him," Gandalf broke in. No, and I don't want to," said Frodo. "I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now at any rate he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death." "Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least. In any case, we did not kill him. He is very old and very wretched. The wood elves have him in prison, but they treat him with such kindness as they can find in their wise hearts." "All the same," said Frodo, "even if Bilbo could not kill Gollum, I wish he had not kept the ring. I wish he had never found it, and that I had not got it. Why did you let me keep it? Why didn't you make me throw it away or destroy it?" The story continues from there, but the things that I want to pull out here is pity. Frodo or Bilbo started his ownership of the ring with pity. That's an important point. That's why he could give it up in the end. Why it was so hard for it to gain a hold on him. It's also want to specifically point out that that Gandalf says, "And he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end. And when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not least." That's a very, very important part of this whole story of the importance of Gollum to this story. And as we continue into out of the Fellowship of the Ring and into the Two Towers to continue this story, continue this understanding of the importance of Gollum, we will learn a little bit more about this. First, though, I want to, rather than going and reading all the information, because there's lots more information in that chapter about Gollum, about what happened to him, I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the things that happen. He gets captured by Sauron. And tortured and gives a whole bunch of information. He gets captured by the Wood Elves of Thranduil's realm, Mirkwood, and not tortured in the same way. He's well treated. He's allowed to live, kept well, and all that kind of stuff. But still, he is imprisoned. So that obviously that's going to affect anybody. That's going to affect Gollum, especially, who is so wretched already, and anything is going to add to that. But he gets captured by Sauron, but also he spends time learning how to get in and out of Mordor, which becomes essential to being a guide for Frodo. This is that first moment where you truly see the importance of Gollum coming out in this story. Obviously, he's important to the story before this by the fact that he was the owner of the ring previous to Bilbo, that Bilbo got it after the ring escaped from Gollum, and so that's already important. The ring was held by Gollum until it was no longer being held by Gollum, and so obviously he's important in that sense because the ring gets passed down to Frodo and Frodo continues. Anyways, you understand that. I'm not worried about that. But the part that is important to this story is that he knows Mordor. He's traveled in Mordor. He knows that there are only two ways of entering and exiting Mordor. One is the Black Gate, the main entrance to Mordor, where it's watched day and night. There's tons and tons of orcs and men and stuff going on all the time, and it's shut. It's the way the door is always shut. You can't get into it. But he also knows about this other secret path, the Cirith the secret stairs. That's another important aspect of this story. He knows about that, and so he can lead Frodo to that path. Of course, that doesn't come up until a little bit later after this next moment that I'm going to read from, but this next moment is something very important that I want to talk about. The Taming of Smeagol, Chapter 1, Book 4, Chapter 1, The Taming of Smeagol. They're talking. Of course, this conversation about pity does come back to Frodo, and he says, "For now that I see him, I do pity him." But that does come back. But what I want to bring out specifically is Smeagol, Gollum. Smeagol says, Smeagol will swear on the precious. Frodo drew himself up, and again Sam was startled by his words and his stern voice. "On the precious? How dare you?" he said. "Think! One ring to rule them all, and in the darkness bind them. Would you commit your promise to that, Smeagol? It will hold you, but it is more treacherous than you are. It may twist your words. Beware." Gollum cowered. "On the precious, he repeated. "And what would you swear?" asked Gollum. "To be very, very good," said Gollum. Then, crawling to Frodo's feet, he groveled before him, whispering hoarsely. A shudder ran over him as if the words shook his very bones with fear. "Smeagol will swear never, never to let him have it. Never. Smeagol will save it, but he must swear on the precious." "No, not on it," said Frodo, looking down at him with stern pity. "All you wish is to see and touch it, if you can. Though you know it would drive you mad. Not on it. Swear by it, if you will. For you know where it is. Yes, you know, Smeagol. It is before you." For a moment, I'm going to skip that, even though it's a very cool scene. "Down, down," said Frodo. "Now speak your promise." "We promises. Yes, I promise," said Gollum. "I will serve the master of the precious. Good master, good Smeagol. Gollum, Gollum." Suddenly he began to weep and bite at his ankle again. I wanted to read this whole passage because it's important to know that Gollum understands, first and foremost, he understands the importance of this oath and that it's going to hold him. It's going to, as it says, bind him. This is a binding oath. As with all oaths in Tolkien's world, this is a very binding oath, and it's important for us to know that and to understand that, especially going forward into this final section in Return of the King that I'll get to in a second here. But this is an important moment because, first off, he understands that it's an oath and that it's binding. But then also, he's swearing on the precious, by the precious. And that's going to come into play momentarily in this next section that I'm going to read. So first off, he swears to obey the ring, or rather the master of the precious. Obviously, he's thinking in the back of his little Gollum mind that, oh, well, I will become the master of the precious and then I can obey myself. That's what he's thinking, that's what he's hoping. We know that the master of the precious is Sauron, so he's going to be serving Sauron. However, his direct words are to the master of the precious, and currently the holder, and therefore by grammatically, the holder and the master of the precious is Frodo, and so he is swearing to serve Frodo in this moment. But the words are such that if he gets the ring, he is the master of the precious and he can serve himself. If nobody has the ring, Sauron is the master of the precious. Even when they do have the ring, Sauron is the master of the precious. And so there's a little, that's a very important note, but it's going to come back into play towards the end of this story. So continuing in this chapter, then in book 4, chapter 6, the Black Gate is closed, we again have more information that I want to read. Already you are twisted. You revealed yourself to me just now, foolishly. Give it back to Smeagol, you said. Do not say that again. Do not let that thought grow in you. You will never get it back, but the desire of it may betray you to a bitter end. You will never get it back. In the last need, Smeagol, I should put on the precious, and the precious mastered you long ago. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey. Even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire, and such would be my command. So have care, Smeagol. Take note of what he says here. If I, wearing it, were to command you, you would obey, even if it were to leap from a precipice or to cast yourself into the fire. So that's the next important point to think about, to understand. Finally, now we can turn to the Return of the King, and we will go to the book 6, chapter, come on, let's get to it, chapter 3, which is Mount Doom. And here, on the slopes of Mount Doom, Frodo takes the ring and commands Gollum that if he ever touches him again, something is going to happen. And let's read what happens here. Down, down, he gasped, clutching his hand to his breast so that beneath the cover of his leather shirt he clasped the ring. Down, you creeping thing, and out of my path. Your time is at an end. You cannot betray me or slay me now. Then suddenly, as before under the eaves of the Emyn Muil, Sam saw these two rivals with other vision, a crouching shape scarcely more than the shadow of a living thing, a creature now wholly ruined and defeated, yet filled with a hideous lust and rage, and before it stood stern, untouchable, now by pity, a figure robed in white, but at its breast it held a wheel of fire. Out of the fire there spoke a commanding voice. Begone and trouble me no more. If you touch me ever again, you shall be cast yourself into the fire of doom. Remember that promise that Frodo made to Smeagol in Two Towers, that he would his command would be that Gollum leap from a precipice or casts himself into the fire. Then again here, voice out of this fire spoke with a commanding voice and says, if you ever touch me again, you shall be cast yourself into the fire of doom. So we have again this same oath coming back to be fulfilled if Gollum ever even touches the ring or touches Frodo again. It is a command at this point. It is a command, it is a vow, it is an oath, and it is going to come back into play momentarily. So let's go to the end of this chapter of Mount Doom. Frodo puts on the ring at the mouth of Mount Doom, claims it as his own, becoming the master once again, something that is important. He told Gollum if he ever needed to, he would put on the ring and command him, and Gollum would obey. We see again that out of the circle of fire came this voice making this oath. And now we have here at the end of the chapter of Mount Doom, suddenly Sam saw Gollum's long hands draw upwards to his mouth. His white fangs gleamed and then snapped as they bit. Frodo gave a cry, and there he was, fallen upon his knees at the chasm's edge. But Gollum, dancing like a mad thing, held aloft the ring, a finger still thrust within its circle. It shone now as if verily it was wrought of living fire. "Precious, precious, precious!" Gollum cried. "My precious, oh my precious!" And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then with a shriek he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail. "Precious!" And he was gone. It is an act that Gollum does. He steps too far, yes. Wasn't his intention, but he still does the action of stepping too far and falling off the precipice into the fire of Mount Doom. So we see this prophecy, this oath fulfilled. In the end, these oaths are fulfilled when Frodo puts on the ring in Mount Doom and claims it as his own. Then Gollum attacks, touching him, and the curse and vow that Frodo made upon him is fulfilled. He casts himself off a precipice and into the fire. In the end, that's the only thing that destroyed the ring, because Frodo lost. The whole story of The Lord of the Rings is, well, first off, it's not about the destroying of the One Ring or the War of the Ring. It is memoir. It's the events that happened and the story that happened to 4 hobbits during the events of this War of the Ring. And that culminates with the story of Frodo and how Frodo does not fail. Frodo does not fail. He successfully brings the ring all the way to Mount Doom. And he doesn't fail, he loses. He loses and puts on the ring, claiming it as his own at the very end. But then Gollum bites it off. And in doing so, completes 2 things at once. Fulfills that which Gandalf said that he still has some part to play. And that part is, first off, to lead them into Mordor. But then, more importantly, to curse himself. And in so doing, destroy the ring with himself. That is the importance of Gollum. His importance is, of course, first and foremost, that he was a ring bearer at one point, that he had a ring, that he was attached to the ring, that the ring was his own. But as you continue through the story, it becomes so much more than that. He's the guide to the ring bearer, and ultimately he is the destroyer of the ring. Through his own actions, through his own curses that he puts upon himself, he becomes the destroyer of the ring, and the fulfiller of prophecy, and the fulfiller of oaths, all at the same time. And that's super cool to me. I love that's such a small little detail. But seeing how it just builds on itself and builds and builds and builds, and you see, first off, his hardiness, the fact that he was a hobbit, that he still had this piece in his mind that allowed him to retain his humanity or his hobbitanity to the point where he can think. He's still there enough to not be corrupted wholly by the ring. And that allows him to then come back and fulfill that part that he still has left to play. Anyways, that is just my Hobbit Day video for 2024. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. I hope you found something interesting in this short video. I don't know how short it will be, but I hope you found something interesting in this video. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite adventure. We will see you guys again soon. Stay well.